Good evening and welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Bruce Whitfield here on ENCA. We're looking at the post-COVID edition of Taking Stock, and we're looking at what it's going to look like once this is all over. Three industries tonight involved in fun. And what COVID-19 has done, without any question of doubt, is remove fun from our lives generally, whether it be the wedding industry, whether it be the tourism industry, or even the concert industry. We have seen a massive disruption of fun, the destruction of jobs, the destruction of livelihoods, and really serious consequences for so many associated industries as well. That is what we're doing this evening on Taking Stock. Well, up first from the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, Tshivhengwa. And Tshifhiwa, I mean, tourism has been probably the hardest hit of all of the sectors in South Africa, and it is going to remain the hardest hit the longest, probably, simply because global tourists aren't going to be coming, certainly not this year, and domestically people are going to be quite apprehensive about traveling as well.
No, absolutely, Bruce. We are the industry that's hard hit, and we can see that by the fact that we don't have any domestic travel happening at the moment, except for business travel. And we are hoping that there will be an increase in leisure travel after the interprovincial borders have been opened, because leisure travel plus business travel on the domestic front will make a whole lot more sense for businesses to open up. Of course, the issues around demand is quite important because, as we all know, the people here in South Africa are quite, they don't have that disposable income to spend at the moment, and everyone is trying to protect what they have and also to protect their savings. So we're hoping that, when we open up for domestic leisure, included the business side of things, we should be able to see some action. But we from the leisure point of view, we believe that there's a core group of people that will always travel no matter what. A lot of people are tired of being in Gauteng. They want to go to Limpopo, they want to go to Mpumalanga and many other areas. And we believe that we'll be able to get groups of people who will be able to travel. But it's a tough road ahead.
I mean, have you got any statistics at all yet on just how many establishments have failed? Establishments that were there, maybe one we liked going to, a year or two ago, and we were hoping to go in 2020, and it may never open its doors again. I'm thinking of small B&Bs. I'm thinking Airbnbs, for example, at the moment aren't allowed to operate. Hotels can operate for business purposes, but Marriott, the big international group, announced that it was closing the Edward in Durban, announced it was closing the iconic Mount Grace in Magaliesburg, for goodness sake. And thank goodness Tsogosan is stepping into the breach there and will reopen these properties in the next 12 to 18 months. But it does just give you a very clear picture of these hospitality properties with zero business for 3 months. Many of them may never open again.
Absolutely. Bruce, we have lost in the past 3 months of lockdown around 68 billion rand. If you take 273 billion that was spent in 2018, and then you annualize it, you will come to that number of 68 billion rand for the past 3 months. So it means every day that the industry is not fully operational, we lose 748 million rand. So that is a significant amount of money, and that's why you're seeing these properties are starting to close doors, and many of these management companies like the Marriott saying that we can no longer manage these properties, and then therefore the owners of the properties now stepping in. We've seen this in bed and breakfast, guest houses, safari lodges, people with concessions. They are unable to pay their fees for those concessions, and many other businesses within the value chain of tourism that are suffering. So the numbers are just huge, and with employment being affected negatively, it's a sight that no one wants to see, and we certainly wouldn't want this to continue. And that's why we're calling for these changes so that people can travel, at least domestic, while we're waiting for international markets to reopen.
We're seeing some very cautious reopening of markets. The Australians and the New Zealanders are talking about having a little corridor between themselves. We've got Greece, which has recently reopened apprehensively and conservatively for travel, and a number of other tourism destinations doing that as well. But one gets the sense that there's going to have to be a huge amount of flexibility here, that some places will open and there'll be a problem and they'll have to close again, or at least cut back dramatically. Restaurants can trade in South Africa once again, and that's good at a certain capacity. However, for tourism destinations, restarting a hotel or a B&B or whatever the case might be, reopening a lodge, is a huge effort. You can't be opening and closing all the time. We need some certainty, and this virus doesn't give us room for certainty.
No, absolutely. We do need some certainty. And interesting enough, we have been talking to the private sector organization in Australia and New Zealand, comparing notes in terms of what they're doing, and also to try to see what protocols have put in place to mitigate the spread of the virus. And you're quite right, we can't open and close all the time, because to restart this machinery takes a lot of money and a lot of investment. So therefore, when we open, we want to be opening for good. And we believe that opening for good requires that the protocols that we've put in place are implemented, because this is a self-regulatory method, are implemented sufficiently, we mitigate the spread of the virus, we're able to track the people that came to our establishments. The same applies to restaurants. And that's what we have said to government, that we will do things in a safe way. And by the way, we've always been a very sanitized industry. And to do these things, it doesn't take a lot for us, because we have been cleaning. We are hospitality at the end of the day. So we know what, solutions to use to make sure that our rooms are clean, our tables are clean, our vehicles are clean. So we believe that whatever we've put together will give us a room not to be shut down, in the future. But we cannot afford a situation where we open and shut. That will be devastating for employment. We will lose many, many thousands of jobs permanently.
I mean, and the real tragedy here, of course, is that many thousands of people have lost their jobs in this crisis. Many of those jobs won't come back, and only a tiny number will come back as we go into this tentative reopening of the tourism industry. We need foreign tourists. We need them to be coming in their droves. Unfortunately, South Africa, because it's a long-haul destination, has quite long lead times. And we saw that happen in Cape Town's water crisis, for example, in 2017, where the real damage was felt only the year after, where the 2018 tourism season was pretty lousy because people were still remembering the drought of the year before, and we still had a no entry sign as regarded the visa regime and all sorts of other things. 2019 was a nice recovery. 2020 sets us back this year, and possibly 2021 and maybe even into 2022 as well. What are your scenarios?
Absolutely. We believe that we will be able to recover to the 2019 numbers somewhere in 2022. That's when we would have, the same amount of money that would have been spent in 2019, which we believe is the same number as 2018, 274 billion rand, around there. So that's in 2022. So we would have lost some few billion rands and some job opportunities in between this pandemic. And of course, it's going to be tough. We do need international tourists to come into the country. International tourists spend around 120 billion rand per year. And that's a significant amount of money. And that's why we're saying that we need to open by September, because between September and April of each year, that's our high season. We receive around 60% of our tourists coming during that time. So if we miss this September, and then we say we're going to open next year, we're going to miss the whole year. We're going to have to wait until 2021 September. And hopefully, the tourists from these source markets are not going to be choosing other countries or other destinations before they choose us. We've got to always remember that we're not the only country that tourists are choosing from. There are many. So therefore, we need to put our foot down and say we will reopen by September. We will be receiving tourists, and we need to create those bubbles and bridges with countries, and we need to start those negotiations now. If we wait until September, then it's lost. We need to make a decision by now, as early as in July, to say to the international markets we are open come September. We're already seeing airlines that are willing to fly into South Africa. Virgin Atlantic is one of them. Some of the US airlines wants to come to South Africa. So there is potential, there is demand. But we, from the private sector, we have put the date for September, and we need government to come to the table on this And to support us and say September will open, we will put together protocols that are good to ensure that there is no spread of the virus. There are many things that many destinations are doing, airlines are doing, the likes of IATA is motivating. We should be able to do this safely, and we need to decide on that date.
Tshifhiwa, thank you very much indeed. Tshifhiwa Tshivhengwa is the Chief Executive of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa. It represents tourism businesses in the country and desperately concerned, of course, about losing yet another tourist season. We've had a really rough couple of years in terms of tourism and arrivals. We've made it very difficult for tourists to come here. Just as we open our borders and say, you're welcome, you no longer need 500 bits of paper in which to come, then COVID-19 has struck. We really need to be proactive, I think, is the message from Tshifhiwa this evening. Thank you very much for joining us on Taking Stock. In a moment, when will you be going back to a concert? We'll speak to the biggest concert promoters in the country in a moment. You're watching Taking Stock on ENCA. Justin Van Beek is the Chief Executive of Big Concerts. What concerts? There are no concerts. Concerts around the world, of course, have been suspended, many cancelled, and we've said so many great global artists have to suspend their lives. Locally, we've seen comedians and musicians and magicians and every other performer really have to resort to going online to try and make a living, and people have had to become incredibly creative. Justin Van Beek, with no big concerts, no concerts of any kind, how many things have you had to cancel, and how far ahead have you cancelled already?
Good afternoon, Bruce. Thanks for having me. So, yeah, tough times for the concert business here in South Africa, as everywhere else in the world. From Canada all the way down to New Zealand, we've had to cancel thousands of shows. The music business was on track for its 15th year of consecutive double-digit growth. We're part of a listed company, Live Nation Entertainment, and our stock price went from, I think it was just shy of $17 billion to about 7.5. So we've been cut in half. So tough times, but fortunately, it's rescheduling. The income's not lost. The artists are still going to go out there and tour. So not this year, but certainly next year. And around the world, we've been working with governments and associations on how to reopen our industry. But locally, we've had to cancel WWE. We've had to cancel KISS. We were looking at a bumper fourth quarter, 6 stadium tours back to back. It was really going to be another good year for us after last year when we had Ed Sheeran and Sam Smith and Andrea Bocelli, all fantastic shows in the market, which are all record sold out shows. And Ed was the highest ever attendance we've had for a singular act. We sold almost 250,000 people attended those 4 shows between Johannesburg and Cape Town. So we'll be back, but it's certainly been a tough time for us.
Are you daring to book yet? Are you daring to put a date in your diary and say, I think that this is a date at which it will be safe to invite an artist and to then put tickets into the market that people will buy, even if slightly gingerly and apprehensively at this stage?
No, so we're not. So we're on at the moment. We've been following all the trends, what's been happening around the world. The Events Safety Council here in South Africa, which has been working with the South African Events Council, has issued reopening guidelines. It's with government. It's been presented to NEDLAC. We hope that the Department of Labour and Department of Health and Sports and Recreation will sign off and approve the guidelines, which calls for a systematic opening of the industry from 300 cap events all the way then up to the 5,000 plus. But it depends on the level of risk of the country, level 1, of course. It depends on how long we've been at level 1, and it depends on other things like international travel. Now, there is going to be a lag, Bruce, between us opening events and people coming back. The polls everywhere in the world suggest that the older audiences will take a bit of time to go back. They want to see that the therapeutic treatments are there. The younger fans, of course, the under 25s, they're roaring to go back, but we have to balance it. So we want to make sure international travel has been reopened for leisure travel as well as business travel, domestic travel, of course. Right now, as you may know, there isn't a single airline in the skies that offers a business class domestic airfare, so that's an interesting challenge to have. So we're gonna have to wait it out. We hope that by the end of the year these restrictions would have been lifted, but we think there'll be a 3 or 4 month gap before people come back.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? Even once restrictions are lifted, and even once you say we've booked, I don't know, Ed Sheeran to come back on a comeback tour, if you like, because his first tour was so fabulous. And, you know, I don't want people in the row behind me singing over my head and their germs dropping down on me anymore. I didn't mind when he was here last time, but people belt out songs and people get excited and they hug and they touch and they boogie and, you know, they sweat and they spit. And suddenly the stuff that we never worried about before, it was a bit gross, but you got home and had a shower. Suddenly we're apprehensive, even though we get an all clear at some point in the future. Our natural instinct is to be a little bit reticent.
So yes, I mean, certainly in terms of the reopening guidelines, concerts sit in the high risk and very high risk category. And we've just been frankly honest with everyone. You're not going to get, you know, especially the younger people, to socially distance by 1.5, 2 meters at a festival or at a live concert. It's just not going to happen. So we need to implement other protocols. You know, we need to have enhanced contact tracing like they've done now in New Zealand. So there's no social distancing there, but they've brought in applications and health passports and all sorts of other things and other measures to prevent and detect. But we're going to have to wait until we have a combination of treatments available that will prevent people from being hospitalized, or if they are hospitalized, you know, prevent them from dying, unless, of course, as you see, it's one or more underlying conditions which are contributing factors to those mortality rates. But it's going to take some time.
I mean, we've all become immunologists and experts at disease control in the last 3 months, and you've had to do it particularly in particular detail. How are you making ends meet then? If you're not actually booking anybody and you're not selling, and all you're doing is like watching the weather forecast to go outside for a run in the sunshine, how are you keeping big concerts ticking over?
Look, it's tough. You know, it's really tough. We've had to suspend our operations. We've had to take a number of cost-cutting measures, you know, preservation of cash. It's the same that our parent companies have been doing around the world. We've had to postpone a lot of tours. You know, it's difficult times. You know, we've had to call on facilities that we have available to us. Fortunately, we're a fairly large company. I think we'll be okay in the end. We'll survive this. But sadly, you know, what our focus is at the moment is on the supply chain. The supply chain, a lot of these people are small, medium-sized enterprises. 85% or more are in serious financial trouble. Some have already foreclosed. Others have working capital until the end of this month. You know, onwards, it's uncertain. So while we may be able to put the lights on in 6 months or 9 months' time, it's not to say we're going to have production vendors around to supply staffing and catering and fencing and sound, lights, video, all of that sort of stuff. And that's the real worry. You know, it's a complete shutdown all of a sudden, and none of these companies, like the restaurant industry, had reserves on hold that can keep them going for a couple of months. So I don't know. I mean, we're seeing it in some of the other markets, packages specifically for the cultural sectors, the live performance sectors. The government did put aside 150 million, but it's an industry that generates tens of billions of rands. It's 150 million. It's not going to carry artists and promoters and venues and festivals through these tough times. So I don't know, Bruce. The short answer is there's going to be a lot of pain for this industry.
Justin van Beek, thank you. Chief Executive at Big Concerts, trying to keep the lights on at big concerts. But the real concern, of course, is the knock-on effect that this is having across the economy. All of their suppliers coming to difficult times indeed. Justin, thank you very much for laying it out as it is. Another industry that has been struggling through COVID-19, but may have a slightly quicker recovery than perhaps tourism, certainly international tourism, and certainly the concerts business. Perhaps we'll see something happening in the wedding trade. Let's talk weddings, a huge enterprise in South Africa, in just a moment. Well, another industry that's been so severely disrupted, we've all been uninvited to a wedding, and this time it wasn't personal. It's simply because weddings haven't been happening this year, certainly not big weddings, certainly not the big bashes that South Africa is so famous for and draw guests from all over the world to come to beautiful wedding venues which have sprung up in the last 20, 25 years. Precious Thamaga is a wedding planner. I mean, it's all fallen apart so spectacularly, Precious. How are things going in your industry?
It's not going great. It's the honest truth. We're still waiting for the green light to see if we can get back to work, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. I think we're the last on the list, probably only at level 1 when they allow gatherings. So definitely it's going to be still a while for us to start work again and make a decent living.
I mean, it's ironic, isn't it, that we can go to church on a Sunday morning, but we can't get 48 of our family to come to that church to watch us getting married and have a little celebration afterwards. I mean, that is illegal at the moment, right?
Exactly. I mean, when the president had the talk for the nation the other day, I think I went on Twitter because it is getting frustrating. I was saying, how is there a difference that we can have gatherings for church, even funerals, with a limited number of people, and it can't be the same with weddings? If anyone is professional enough and experienced enough, it's a wedding planner that would make sure all the strict rules are adhered to, all the health and safety checks are adhered to. And I think when someone is planning a wedding and they've got a professional helping them, they'll do their best to make sure that everyone that's invited, no matter how small the number is, that all those precautions are taken into place. So it's really
the trouble is, Precious. I mean, so many of the cases, especially the early COVID cases, came about as family gatherings, family celebrations, family joyful celebrations, not only here, but all over the world. Horrific stories of entire families getting infected and generations of people getting sick and dying in this case. I mean, it's understandable the government is apprehensive.
No, I understand in that regard. And I think when our clients as professionals, because as a group of us in the industry, we've kind of formed a safety net of where to talk and see how things are, what we need to do as an industry to see how we can actually start working again. We do become very realistic about the fact that we can't, promote people having celebrations, because that is very risky and it's not a responsible thing to do. So we definitely understand in that regard. It's just not a good place to be that we can't work. But
absolutely. And it's not only you. Justin van Wyk at Big Concerts was just telling us a moment ago, he doesn't know who's going to erect the fences and put up the portaloos and who's going to do all of the stuff that we don't notice at concerts but are critical. Your suppliers, I mean, people whose livelihoods are built around the wedding industry, people who make the napkins and the table decorations and all of those important things that contribute to the overall look and feel of the day, they're in trouble too.
It's a big impact. It's not just a small percentage. And when people question, when you say a comment like, the event and wedding industry contributes so much to the economy, people are like, no. And when you bring out the stats, how people are shocked that it's a big industry. I mean, when I started this, it was a matter of when my parents are like, you sure you want to leave corporate? And I was like, everyone is always getting married. Everyone is always celebrating something. So I'm never going to be out of a job, but look at us now. People want to celebrate, but they can't.
Are you planning? I mean, you are by nature a planner. That's what you do. You like spreadsheets and you like making marks on bits of paper and you like looking ahead and structuring things. Are you looking at September weddings, October, December, February weddings? How far are you planning ahead?
So like I said, I'm very realistic. So all the clients that I had personally for this year, I've kind of encouraged them to postpone to 2021 for many reasons. First of all is, to avoid the risk of losing deposits that they've done already, because some suppliers are not as, lenient in terms of refunding. So I've kind of made my clients postpone rather than risk, planning and only closer to the time canceling, because now it's not going to be a postponement anymore. It's going to be a cancellation. So now the contract changes in that matter. So it's it's very difficult to convince clients that they must postpone, but they understand the reason why. And there are some that are still adamant on planning for December. And in my view is until 3 months before, if nothing has changed, we have to postpone before it gets into that line where now it's a cancellation. But all 16 weddings that I had for this year, they've all been moved to 2021. And yeah.
We'll find out whether or not people got on in lockdown as to how many of those weddings translate from 2020 to 2021, whether or not they'll still be keen to get married, because this has been the ultimate test, of course, of those relationships too. Precious, thank you very much for joining us. Precious Thamaga, keeping it all together in the wedding industry, another industry under siege. That's it for Taking Stock on this evening. Thank you very much for joining us and for watching a slightly depressing outlook for so many industries in South Africa. The Tourism Business Council Chief Executive joined us, and that's Tshivhengwa. We also spoke to Justin van Wyk, the Chief Executive at Big Concerts, and also to Precious Thamaga, who is the wedding planner. That is an industry that is, again, under huge amount of duress. Thank you so much for watching a slightly depressing edition of the program. But all of these guys so terribly keen to get back to work, to make a living for themselves and for so many other people whose industries are associated with them. Have a good evening. Good night.